I'll start by saying this, that everyone thinks that they are right. Um, I've met very few people who don't think that they're right. Everyone thinks they're right. I was just in a conversation with a non-Christian about the claims of Christianity, and he was asking me if I felt kind of bothered by my stance of being a Christian, believing that I hold the right worldview versus versus somebody else's worldview. And that's I think a common thing for people to kind of wonder. Well, how do you feel like you can be so sure? And I told him, of course, I'm not going to force. Um, sorry, let me close. Get set here. I'm not going to force, obviously, somebody to believe like I do. But at the same time, I had to tell him, but I do think that I'm right. And if I was convinced otherwise, I'd change my mind so that I'd become right. Right? Like I'm not purposely thinking wrongly. So I think to some extent, everybody thinks they're right, or they would change their mind to become right. Right? And not only do we think that we're right, but more times than not, I think we believe that our solution, that my solution is the best. And if we would all just do this, if we would all just live this way, it would lead to something good. It would lead to righteousness. It would lead to peace. And there's this idea that I feel in my own heart sometimes. Just sometimes you just need to understand that you're wrong and change your mind, and then you will be solved and the problem will be solved. Or I hear things like, oh, bless his heart. He just doesn't know. They just don't know. Bless their heart. Like if they just had the right information, if I could just get this person to understand the facts, then surely they would find the light and they would start being fixed. We think that information is salvation. So we've become a society, I think it's easy to see, a society of information transmitters and receivers. So we have news channels all over the place, whether it's on our phones or TV or iPads or whatever it is. We have podcasts that are constantly teaching us new information. We applaud the idea of education for everyone, how important the information that comes through education is to us. We have documentaries, a plethora, teaching us all sorts of things. And that's the kind of society that we live in. In fact, in the 90s, the internet was, I don't know, some of you won't remember, but it was called the information superhighway, where you can find everything that you might need to know. And with people communicating and receiving more and more information these days, how's that going for us? Has information provided salvation in a way? Are we all becoming more agreeable as to what is right and wrong, good and evil, because we have the right information? Like, are we all becoming more helpful and less hurtful now that we have all the information so that we can do the right things? Has that information saved us? I think that was the big fail of the Enlightenment, if I understand time periods correctly. We thought that science and knowledge would fix everything. The more, and now that we have this momentum, this multiplying information more and more in our society, that will begin to fix things. Well, what's the result then after the Enlightenment of the 19th, I guess 17th through 19th century? The result is the 1900s, which was a bloodier century than the previous 19 centuries all put together. To some extent, I think you could say the information has failed us. It's led now or recently to postmodernism, which kind of doesn't trust information, but then you realize after long, well, that doesn't work. There has to be some true information out there. So now we're going back to, science. We need to just trust what science says, and back to kind of the information, the hope that information can get us out of our problems. And I was thinking, why I think the things aren't going so great It's because people aren't listening to my information. That's why there's problems in the world. People don't listen to my information. And I think that maybe describes some of the problem. The problem is this: if you and I are at odds about something, then I just think that all you need is my solution, and you just think that all that I need is your solution. And so we fight for our own information. And that happens all around us. It happens within the church. It happens outside of the church. Within the church, I remember a conversation that Mary Beth and I had, or we were having years ago with a pastor about a theological issue that Mary Beth had been wrestling with for years and put a lot of study and hard work and was just trying to think it through. And that pastor told her, "Oh, Mary Beth, just give me 5 minutes and I'll show you what's right. Just 5 minutes of information. That's all you need. It's easy." And I remember her just thinking, that's all. All I need to know is this bit of information, and then I'm going to be convinced of this one thing, and everything's going to be fine. But we think that, yeah, you just need to hear my information so that you can be changed and everyone can live right then. Tonight in James chapter 3, James is going to tell us that there is another way to rightness, to righteousness, to good living, to peace. If we truly want to promote good and living God's way as believers, if we want to propagate wisdom and wise living, which certainly as Christians we should have the edge on, it won't happen through information transfer. Let's look at James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. And if possible, I'd love to have somebody else read that. So James 3, 13 through 18. Has anybody got that and can unmute for a minute to read it? 13 through the end of the chapter.
I can read, but I don't know if my audio is messed up.
No, it sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay. 13 through the end of the chapter.
Yes, please.
Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exists, there is disorder and every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteous is sown in peace by those who make peace.
All right, so verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. If you remember, we just came out of the section that warned about our tongue, that it's very dangerous, and so we shouldn't be quick to speak, and certainly we shouldn't be quick to want to teach. But certainly there's good information out there, and there are those who should give that information. And it's almost like James is looking around asking this question: who is wise and understanding among you? Where are we going to find the answers? Do we have any teachers among us? From our look into chapter 1 weeks ago, we talked a little bit about wisdom, quite a bit, and said that we tend to think of, if you're like me anyway, you tend to think of wisdom as answers to questions, answers to life's deepest mysteries. But as we looked at it throughout Scripture, we saw really biblical wisdom is not explanation so much as right application. So it doesn't necessarily explain why a problem exists or something that we can't understand, but it tells us what to do. So it's not about information. Wisdom is about implementation, right? It doesn't just stay in our heads, or it's not wisdom. Somebody's not wise because they know the right things. You won't get wise by listening to teaching on the book of James or any of your podcasts. You'll be wise by doing what it is telling you to do. But we tend to think of wisdom and understanding as coming through words, right? It's information. Let me impart my wisdom to you. But look at what James says here again. The NIV actually that Jeff read, I think was reading out of, it actually says it like this: who is wise and understanding among you? let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. Or the New Living Translation, if you are wise and understanding, and you understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. So here it is again. It's something a little counterintuitive in James, that you can show how wise you are, not by your informative words, but by your quiet conduct. You can't prove to me that you're wise by what you say. At the end of this chapter, wisdom, in verse 18, we are shown that it shows itself in its fruit. Or like Jesus says in Luke 7:35, wisdom is justified by all her children. The offspring of wisdom, what it produces, shows that it actually exists. You're not going to hear wisdom in an argument. You're going to see it lived out before your eyes. So yes, to be wise, we do have to have information, but that alone doesn't make us wise. Information is not salvation. Information is secondary. Information is secondary. And hold on to that thought, because we're going to come back to that as we look at the following verses. Now, the rest of the evening is going to have quite a few definitions. I don't love it when a pastor goes through a passage and they just define all of the words, because it's like, yeah, that's why the English translators chose that particular word. They chose the best translation for that word, and we don't need definitions beyond that because we understand the English. But I think tonight it might actually prove to be helpful as we consider wisdom from above. So first, it says that, let's see. Oh, in the meekness of wisdom. By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. When a person's wisdom is being proven by their good conduct, those works will be done in meekness. We aren't to advertise what we're doing. Jesus says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Meekness, it's not always a desirable characteristic. In fact, I think in the Greek world, it would be looked down upon. It's like humility. Sometimes it's not really valuable. We say, oh, well, that's a humble person. Oh, they're kind of meek, or gentle, as a lot of translations have it. It's like, well, that can kind of be looking down on somebody if they are meek. But how does the wisest person who ever lived describe himself? Jesus says, I am gentle. I'm lowly in heart. Gentle is that word meek. And he says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. In James's day, meekness might have been used to talk about a wild horse being broke so that it becomes useful. So it's not wild anymore. It doesn't kick like it has the power to do, but it restrains itself. That's kind of a picture of meekness. And if you think in the context of the mouth and wisdom, which we're in right here, maybe you could say that it's a person that could talk, that has really important things to say, but doesn't necessarily always say those things. Maybe somebody has a lot to say. Maybe they even have the right information, but instead of just talking, they do. That's the wise person that they're doing in meekness. If I'm looking for the wisest person in the room, then I might not look to the one who is talking all the time, but I might look to the person who is working behind the scenes as far as the meekness that Jesus calls us to. Who is wise and understanding? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. Verse 14, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. These words, I think, need definition. They're actually used a little bit widely. The range of the word meaning is a little bit wide, and so I'm gonna put a little bit of specificity to it. So jealousy. I think the Greek word is zelos, and it's often translated, maybe in your translation of the Bible, it's called zeal. It's a zeal or fervor to obtain something, or to have something, or to see something happen. And you want it with such zeal that it consumes you. That's jealousy. Oftentimes in the New Testament, it involves opposing parties. And I want what my party wants. I want to stand up. I will go to the death for what my party wants. So Jews had zeal for the Jewish faith against Christianity. So you see in Acts, there's a bunch of signs and wonders being performed by the apostles, and the apostles are becoming more and more popular. And the Sadducees, it says, were filled with jealousy. They're jealous, not just because somebody else is getting the fame, but because they love so much of what they are into. They're so consumed with what they believe. They have a zeal for it. There's a Jewish zeal we see in the New Testament, read a little bit about, against the Romans. That's the party of the zealots, right? I think that's part of the same word. We love our side so much that we will fight for it against Rome. There is also Christian zeal against other Christians. In the book of Corinthians, in the beginning, you see there's these factions forming within Christianity that are led by certain leaders, or there's people that are grabbing onto certain leaders, Paul and Apollos and Cephas, and there is jealousy among them, Paul says. It's a zeal for your own party. And zeal or jealousy can be good or bad. Like that jealousy in and of itself isn't bad, but here we read it's bitter jealousy that James is saying. If you have bitter jealousy, bitter is the same word as salt in verse 12, the salt pond that can't yield fresh water like our mouths. It's bitter, so it's bad. He's talking about a bad jealousy. I stand for something so strongly that it is bitterly consuming me. Okay? Jealousy. I'll probably most often tonight call it bitter zeal or zeal tonight. That's, in my opinion, maybe makes more sense to what James is going for. And you'll see it in some translations. Selfish ambition. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, this is selfishness against others, or rivalry, hostility, opposition, contentiousness. Okay, so it's similar to the previous word in zealous. Paul says in Philippians 2, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. That's rivalry. But in humility, count others more significant than yourself. So don't do things because you are rivals, you are against this person, but think of them as actually better than you, and so serve and so love them. Once again, this word has this kind of flavor of opposing parties or sides. One commentator says that this word in its only pre-New Testament occurrence, which was in Aristotle, a few hundred years before Christ, the word refers to the selfish ambition, the narrow partisan zeal of factional, greedy politicians. They're greedy, they're contentious, though, against other people. And he says, this makes excellent sense here in James. Some who pride themselves on their wisdom and understanding are displaying a jealous, bitter partisanship that is the antithesis of the meekness produced by true wisdom. And these factions may even form among the church. We see Paul tell the Philippians, these are maybe famous passages, he says, some preach Christ, so they're doing a Christian thing, they're preaching the gospel, this is good. Some preach him, though, from envy and from rivalry, but others from goodwill. And he says the latter, or the former, they proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition. There it is. They proclaim Christ out of rivalry, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment, he says. What an interesting thought that is, that they're preaching Christ, not even because they care about the information, the salvation message that they're giving. That's not what's on the forefront of their mind. They just want to win. They're preaching Christ out of competition with Paul. Maybe they want to have more converts. So it has less to do with even what is reasonable or even what's right, but there's this feeling of being against someone, and I need to win and I need to be on the right side. We've all felt this in different ways. I think the main way that most of us feel that right now, this selfish ambition or this rivalry and contention, is in politics, right? We feel a contentiousness, not only in other people, but I imagine many of you feel that, like I do, in myself. And I think if we're really honest, it doesn't always even matter what the information is, but we have a tendency to fight against those who we feel like are fighting against us, who are on the other side. Okay? We'll talk more about that in just a minute. So the first one, jealousy, kind of focuses more on the ideal that you are fighting for, and selfish ambition focuses on the side that you're fighting against. So it's a zeal for what I think is right, and it's a contentiousness against what is against me. And we feel all of these things, and so James says, if you feel these things, if there is jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. False to the truth. Think about the person who is steeped in bitter zeal and selfish rivalry, contentiousness. And isn't it true that in their pride, they may become so wrapped up in it that they may begin to stand for what they're saying, even if it starts to not make sense. But they're so in it that they become false to the truth. Boasting and being false to the truth. That's when your bitter jealousy and selfish rivalry, they've blinded you so much that you're kind of willing to start making concessions on the truth itself in order just to be right, to have your party win and the other party lose. You're so caught up in the emotions, maybe, that you even just start saying dumb things. It's like that doesn't even make sense, but you're so committed, you're so stubborn, and you just can't be wrong. Now, maybe you're thinking about somebody else right now, right? That's easy to do. But I think we all do this. I'll mention a couple different areas that we do this in, a few. Obviously, we do this in politics and see this done all around us in politics. We may stand up for something, and honestly, whether it's right or wrong, because we're so locked into our own side, we can't change. Like, this is the platform that I'm on, so I have to fight for it. Even if in some ways it stops making sense to me, I'm going to concede on those things because this is where I stand. And I've stood here for so long. My family stands here, whatever it is. We do this with theology. We pick our theological camp, and then we're so locked into that camp, which is a man-made camp, like whether it's Calvinism versus Arminianism, whether it's complementarianism versus egalitarianism, premillennialism, postmillennialism, ism. And we get so locked into this system that we've created out of Scripture that sometimes we'll come to a verse that says something that contradicts that, but we're willing to use a really bad hermeneutic or Bible interpretation method to try to twist that into what we already believe. We're being false to the truth in our pride, not understanding that this could actually be crafting and changing what I've already believed, even if in small ways. Maybe it's a particular diet that you've been on and you've always promoted and you've always plugged, and you've like, this is the way, this is what's healthy, that you'll start just eating a bunch of bacon and ham and thinking that it's going to be good for your body. Maybe it is a way of parenting that you're like, nope, this is the way. and you just, whether or not there's good information on the other side, you're locked into it. For me, a big one I remember, this is kind of a silly one, but growing up, like as a young man, I was a PC guy over Apple Macintosh computers. It was PC all the way. And I didn't want to listen to the other side. I thought Mac users, they're so simple, and their computers, they just can't perform intense, complex operations, and you just can't update them how you want to, and there's not an open platform, and blah, blah, blah. I didn't even know what I was talking about, but I was so locked into that, that even the very fact that Apples are so much better, I was blind to that truth because I was boastful. At some point, God humbled me and I made the switch. And now I'm the opposite way. I can't stand listening to somebody who thinks that PCs are actually better than Macs. Anyway, but we do this maybe in a lot of different ways. And James then says, if you feel that, if you have these things, jealousy, a bitter zeal, if you have rivalry, arrogance, then regarding what you think you're so wise in, he says, this isn't wisdom that comes down from above in the next verse, verse 15. This is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. I want you to notice in this verse that James isn't saying that your wisdom that's wrapped up in rivalry and ambition, he's not saying that you're holding to the wrong information. Okay? He's not even saying that you're fighting on the wrong side. What he's saying is, if you feel these things in your heart, you are already wrong. The content doesn't even matter. Once again, the information is secondary. Verse 15 uses these words, worldly. Worldly is, it's something that you can discover apart from God. It's of this world. It's limited to man's theorizing. Maybe they get it right, maybe they don't. Unspiritual is just fleshly. It's something that you can sense. It's a naturally sensed thing. Unspiritual, one commentator said, it has to do with that part of man where human feeling and human reason reign supreme. That's like the top of what you can do. And if you think about it, the information of man apart from God, set in the context of bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, and that doesn't sound good. And you can see, yeah, that's not wisdom. It's demonic, he says. It's devilish. There's no way to soften that word. So worldly, unspiritual, demonic. When you think you're wise, but that knowledge is set in a heart of bitter zeal and rivalry and party love, then your wisdom is from the world and from your flesh and from the devil. No matter what your stance is, the information is secondary. And wisdom is justified by her children. If we look at verse 16. Verse 16 says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition, same two words as the 2 verses ago, where they exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. So you see, just again, defining some terms, disorder, that's the same word as in chapter 1, verse 8, where James says the one who doesn't ask in faith but asks with doubting is unstable. He's like driven and tossed by the wind. He's unstable. That's disorder. And in chapter 3, verse 8, these themes James keeps coming back to. The tongue, he says, is a restless evil. You just don't kind of know where it's going to go. It's also used, Jesus uses it in Luke 21, disorder, to describe the political kind of tumultuousness and unrest that the end times is going to face, this idea of almost an anarchy. That kind of disorder is where this jealousy and selfish ambition lead to. That's the children of wisdom that is not from above. And every vile practice. One commentator or Bible dictionary, I think, translated it and says, it's good for nothingness. The utter impossibility of any true gain ever coming forth from it. That's what that wisdom is good for. It leads to worthlessness. Bitter party zeal and rivalry don't accomplish anything good. And where it exists, the net effect or result of that is disorder, instability, worthlessness. And maybe you feel that right now. Again, it's really easy on this topic to kind of look at our secular world of politics. How much of our politicians' time seems to be working towards something that is good for nothing? Like, it's literally just trying to tear down the rival. It's not debating solutions, it's debating the opponent, right? That's where a lot of time seems to be focused. I think it's frustrating to all of us. And how ironic that both sides of our political spectrum in this contention with each other, on the surface, they will say that they are fighting to accomplish worthwhile good things, what we as Christians might call righteousness, less death, better economy for people, more jobs, equality between people. That's the verbal display, but the motivation of the heart oftentimes that we see behind that screws up any right plan. It doesn't matter even what the information is so much, or what a particular side comes up with, or what a particular plan looks like. With bitter party zeal and contentious rivalry, it can't be wisdom from above if that's the place that it comes out of. And it's proving itself in our country right now in disorder and worthlessness. So I don't care how good your plan is, the information within that plan is secondary to the motivation of your heart in that. Now, let's look at the wisdom from above in verse 17 for a breath of fresh air. And notice that God's wisdom has everything to do with right heart motivation. It's not even so much about the information of God's wisdom, but our heart. He says in verse 17, but the wisdom from above is first pure. Pure means there's no unjust motives. It's literally just a wanting to do right. There's nothing behind that, like selfish ambition or rivalry, any of that sort of thing. It's just, for us, it's genuinely just wanting what God wants. And that's really easy to say, and I know a lot of people would say that, or a lot of people would argue, I'm just wanting to do the right thing, I'm just wanting to fight for the right thing. But a lot of times I wonder if we dig really deep, if our information and solutions is not always, or are not always quite so pure, and there's actually kind of an ugly or bitter motivation behind fighting for that, maybe. But the wisdom from above is pure, nothing else but wanting what is right and good. It's peaceable, not creating conflict with others. It's gentle, that's not combative. Or another word would be, it's moderate. I love the next phrase. It says, wisdom from above is open to reason. I read that's just one word in the Greek, but I read some Bible dictionaries on that. It's this idea of willing, very willing to yield to something else or someone else. It's someone who will gladly be corrected or gladly learn something new. It's somebody, it's being open to persuasion, or literally, actually, I think the word, if you look at the semantic like beginnings of the word, I forget what that's called, but it literally means easily persuaded. The wisdom from above, God's wisdom that he gives to us, is easily persuaded. Now, that doesn't mean it's weak or it's gullible, but it's also not hard to change. It's teachable. It's not stubborn. It's agreeable. Like I actually hope that what you have for me, that your information, I actually hope that I can change to your idea. I'm wanting the truth so bad. I'm wanting wisdom to walk in so bad that I'm easily going to be changed over to your side, which is so interesting to me because, again, we tend to think of wisdom as knowledge or unchanging truth. There is a set wisdom, but here the way wisdom is described is more of a character trait, right? Like if you think about it, you're not wise because of what you know, but you're wise because your disposition is willing to change what you know. That's your heart behind it. Oh, she changed her mind. She must be wise from God. Not for getting the facts right, but for having a heart that is willing to do that, that wants to do that. If I'm not willing to change my position, I'm a fool. And so you see the information itself, the knowledge itself, is secondary. Not that it's not important, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the driving factor. It's the heart posture that matters in this. Wisdom from above is full of mercy and good fruits. I don't know if you've ever seen a debate where there's two people obviously disagreeing on something and even disagreeing very directly, but one or both of them hopefully seem very full of mercy. Have you ever seen that in a debate? It doesn't always go that way, but man, it's beautiful. And you think that person is wise when they're full of mercy. And maybe if they ran into the other person after the seminar and they had broken down on the side of the road, I think they would actually go and help that person because they're full of mercy and good fruits. That's the wisdom from above. It's impartial. That just means it's consistent, or it's treating everyone the same. If you give the benefit of the doubt to one side, then give the benefit of the doubt to the other. And wisdom from above is sincere. That means genuine, or it's not showy, it's not hypocritical. It's genuine, it's sincere. Now I want you to look at your Bible at the characteristics of wisdom from above that we just read, verse 17. And answer this question, this little sidebar. How much of this kind of wisdom are you going to get from Fox News or CNN? You don't have to answer that out loud. I'm careful. Mary Beth and I try to be careful to watch both. And I realize there's more news sources than that, but to kind of watch two different sides, I think everybody can at least say that they tend towards one side or the other. It's okay to watch the news, and there's information, hopefully, that we can get out of that. But I doubt that you will find very much, if any, wisdom from above in either. You'll get more knowledge. Again, maybe that's questionable, but you'll get little to no wisdom from above, at least from what I've seen in recent months. And because those networks are not providing wisdom from above, what results can we expect that they will lead to? Maybe disorder and every vile practice. Or you won't get what you say you're fighting for. The goodness and the righteousness and the peace that you want may not be what you end up getting. Anyway, that's just a little tidbit there. We need to watch and be careful. I'm not saying don't watch the news. I think it's actually a good thing. I've learned in recent years to watch the news more. I think it's good to be informed in that way, but I don't expect to receive God's wisdom through that outlet. Maybe that's obvious. Verse 18, I love this. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. The way that sentence is structured is a little awkward, and so I'll read it in the NIV, which I think does a good job making good sense of it. It says this: peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Now, this is counterintuitive, this wisdom from above, because we want to solve problems by being zealous for our way, for my information, by contending with one who doesn't have the correct information, and by defeating that other side. But Jesus and James come along and say, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. And that is wisdom from above. We have two options: wisdom from below and wisdom from above. Wisdom from below seeks to bring righteousness by sowing contentiously. Wisdom from above seeks to bring righteousness by sowing in peace. And here's the shocker in all of it: the information you're sowing may be the same in both cases, in wisdom from above or wisdom from below. Maybe it's not, but it might be, because both wisdom from above and wisdom from below, they might have the same information. It's just that one is packaged in a bitter zeal and contention and produces disorder and worthlessness, and the other is packaged in peace and purity and gentleness and mercy, and it produces a harvest of righteousness. But the information itself is secondary. The heart is primary. And I'd rather have a bad solution with the right heart than a good solution with the wrong heart. You won't have wisdom, I'm done here, but you won't have wisdom that leads to righteousness by standing for your rivalrous case or cause. Don't promote your cause while you have bitter zeal and rivalry. You are at risk of being false to the truth. You'll only have wisdom that leads to righteousness, which is what we want, by doing right yourself meekly, show it by the good works that you do, and by sowing wisdom in peace. Wisdom has everything to do with the attitude of the heart and living that out appropriately, and the information is secondary. Proverbs 3:17 says this regarding wisdom: her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. The path that wisdom takes is always through peace.